The February wind cut through Denver's downtown corridor like a blade, scattering yesterday's newspaper across the sidewalk where Marcus Reed stood outside the police administration building for what he knew would be the last time. 47 years old, 23 years of service, and it all came down to a single manila envelope pressed into his calloused hands by Captain Davidson, a man who'd once called him the best officer in the district. The envelope felt light, almost insulting in its thinness. Inside was a termination letter citing inability to perform duties due to post-traumatic stress disorder, effective immediately, pension forfeited due to medical discharge before retirement age. Marcus read it twice, the words blurring together before shoving it into his jacket pocket and walking away without looking back. His Ford pickup sat in the parking garage, engine block cold, windshield frosted despite the weak afternoon sun. He climbed in and gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, breathing hard through his nose, the way the department's psychologist had taught him during those mandatory sessions after Sarah died. 8 months had passed since the accident on Highway 70, 8 months of sleepless nights and panic attacks during routine traffic stops, 8 months of Emma's silence pressing down on him like a physical weight. The department had been patient at first, understanding even, but patience had limits when an officer froze during a domestic disturbance call, hand trembling too badly to draw his weapon. Marcus had seen the fear in his partner's eyes that night, the calculation of risk, and he'd known then that his career was finished. The drive home took 20 minutes through rush hour traffic, past the apartment complex where the eviction notice had been taped to his door 3 days ago. $40,000 in medical bills from Sarah's final weeks, maxed credit cards, and now no income. The landlord had been apologetic but firm, out by the end of the month. Marcus had packed what mattered into boxes that now filled the truck bed, covered with a tarp against the snow that meteorologists promised would arrive by evening. Everything else, the furniture and kitchen appliances and wedding photos, he couldn't bear to look at anymore. He'd left behind. Emma sat in the passenger seat now, small for 10 years old, her brown hair unbrushed and tangled around a face so pale it made Marcus's chest ache. She clutched the stuffed rabbit Sarah had won for her at the state fair 3 summers ago, back when laughter had been common in their household. The rabbit's ears hung limp, one eye missing, its fabric worn thin from constant handling. Emma hadn't spoken since the hospital, since the doctor had pulled Marcus aside to explain that his wife hadn't survived the surgery, that the internal injuries from the crash were too severe. Emma had been in the back seat, strapped in tight, watching everything. Everything. The therapist said selective mutism was the mind's way of protecting itself from unbearable trauma. Marcus thought it was just his daughter disappearing piece by piece while he stood helpless. The real estate office occupied a strip mall between a payday loan store and a shuttered Chinese restaurant, its windows plastered with foreclosure listings and short sale notices. Marcus had found the cabin listing online 3 weeks ago, scrolling through properties at 2 in the morning when sleep wouldn't come, when the walls of the apartment felt like they were closing in. $5. That's what the ad said. A log cabin in Pine Ridge, Colorado, 4 hours west into the mountains, being sold by a private party for $5 and assumption of back taxes. It sounded like a scam, but Marcus had called anyway, driven by the kind of desperation that makes impossible things seem reasonable. The man who'd answered identified himself as Eli Hawkins, real estate consultant. His voice over the phone had carried an edge of amusement, as if he found the whole transaction entertaining. Marcus had made an appointment for today, though the word appointment felt too formal for what was essentially a last-ditch gamble with money he couldn't afford to lose. Inside, the office smelled of burnt coffee and copy machine toner. Eli Hawkins sat behind a metal desk cluttered with file folders and an ancient desktop computer, its monitor thick and boxy like something from the previous decade. He looked up when Marcus entered, Emma trailing behind, and his expression shifted from professional neutrality to something closer to contempt. Eli was mid-50s, tall and wiry in a way that suggested hard living rather than athletic discipline. His face weathered and sharp, cheekbones prominent beneath sunken eyes. A patchy beard clung to his jaw, streaked with gray, and his lips curled in what might have been a smile if it held any warmth. Marcus approached the desk, resisting the urge to put a protective hand on Emma's shoulder. The girl had found a chair in the corner and sat there now, rabbit pressed to her chest, eyes fixed on nothing. Eli leaned back, the chair creaking. His gaze traveled from Marcus's worn police jacket to the scuffed boots, to the obvious exhaustion carved into every line of his face. He pulled a file from the stack and flipped it open with exaggerated casualness. A police badge glinted from Marcus's jacket pocket, still pinned there out of habit, and Eli's eyes locked onto it. His voice came out rough, almost gravelly, like he'd spent too many years smoking cheap cigarettes. Marcus Reed, age 47, formerly employed by Denver Police Department. He paused, scanning the page. Recently terminated. Outstanding debt, no permanent address as of 3 days ago. And you want to buy a cabin in the mountains for $5. The words landed like punches. Marcus kept his face neutral, the cop instinct to hide emotion still strong. That's why I'm here. The listing said, I know what the listing said. Eli closed the file with a snap. I wrote it. What I'm trying to understand is why a man in your position thinks this is a good idea. You have a kid. His gaze flicked to Emma, dismissive. Taking her into the wilderness when you've got nothing. No job, no money, probably no plan beyond desperation. Heat rose in Marcus's throat. His hands clenched at his sides. I can take care of my daughter. Can you? Eli's smile widened, showing teeth that were uneven, one front tooth chipped. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're drowning and grabbing at straws. That cabin's been empty for years. No heat, no electricity, barely standing. You know why it's $5? Because nobody wants it. 7 previous owners, and none of them lasted more than 2 years. Marcus forced his voice to stay level. Wait, does it matter? Eli shrugged. Point is, this isn't some fairy tale fresh start. It's a dump in the middle of nowhere, and winter's coming. You'll freeze. Your kid will freeze. And when you come crawling back to civilization, I won't refund your $5. The contempt was so thick, Marcus could taste it. He thought about walking out, about finding another solution, but there were no other solutions. Every door had closed. This was it. The last chance before they ended up in a shelter, or worse, before Emma disappeared entirely into her silence, and he lost her the way he'd lost Sarah. He pulled a $5 bill from his wallet, creased and worn, and placed it on the desk. I'll take it. Eli stared at him for a long moment, then laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You're serious. You're actually serious. He pulled a stack of papers from a drawer and slid them across the desk along with a pen. Sign here, here, and here. There's a liability waiver because the property's sold as is, no inspections, no guarantees. You break your neck out there, that's on you. Marcus signed without reading, his handwriting barely legible. His mind was already moving ahead, calculating supplies, planning the drive, trying to outrun the sense that he was making a catastrophic mistake. Eli took the papers and the $5 bill, tucking both into the folder. He pulled a key from his pocket, rusty and small, and held it up like a taunt before dropping it onto the desk. Congratulations. You're now the proud owner of a death trap. The address is on the deed. Pine Ridge, about 4 hours west on Highway 6, then another hour on mountain roads. There's a map in the glove box of that truck of yours, assuming you bothered to check. He paused, his expression shifting to something darker. One more thing. When you get there and realize what a mistake this was, don't come looking for me. I gave you exactly what you paid for. Marcus pocketed the key and turned to leave. Emma stood without prompting, following him like a shadow. At the door, Eli's voice stopped him. Hey, Reed. Marcus looked back. Eli leaned forward, elbows on the desk, his smile gone. That cabin, people say it's cursed. I don't believe in curses, but I believe in bad luck. And you look like a man who's already had his share. Just thought you should know. Marcus walked out without responding. Emma climbed into the truck, and he started the engine, his hands shaking slightly as he gripped the wheel. The $5 transaction had taken less than 15 minutes. 15 minutes to trade everything familiar for a gamble on a property site unseen, based on nothing but a desperate hope that distance and isolation might somehow fix what was broken. The drive west took them out of Denver's sprawl and into the foothills of the Rockies, the landscape shifting from urban sprawl to open plains to forested slopes as the afternoon wore on. Snow began to fall an hour into the drive, light at first, then heavier, fat flakes that melted on the windshield before the wipers could clear them. Emma sat motionless, her reflection ghost-like in the passenger window. And Marcus tried twice to start a conversation, asking if she was hungry, if she needed a bathroom stop, if she wanted to listen to music. Silence answered him each time. Highway 6 narrowed to two lanes winding through pine forests that pressed close on either side. Traffic thinned to nothing. The truck's heater rattled, but produced only weak warmth, and Marcus cranked it higher, watching the fuel gauge drop. He'd filled the tank before leaving Denver, one of the last purchases on a credit card that was now maxed out. After this, there was nothing. No safety net, no backup plan, just the cabin and whatever he could make of it. The turnoff to Pine Ridge appeared suddenly, a hand-painted sign so weathered the letters were barely visible. Marcus took the exit onto a road that was more gravel than asphalt, potholes jarring the suspension, branches scraping the truck's sides. The forest closed in, dense and dark despite the afternoon hour, the sky above gray and heavy with snow. He checked the map, squinting at the faded lines, then continued deeper into the woods. The cabin appeared without warning as the trees parted, and Marcus's stomach dropped. It was worse than he'd imagined. A squat structure of logs so old they'd gone black with age. The roof sagging in the middle like a broken spine. Windows clouded with dirt and one cracked clean through. The porch steps were rotted, one missing entirely, and the chimney leaned at an angle that suggested a strong wind might topple it. Snow had begun to accumulate on the roof, adding weight to a structure that looked like it might collapse under its own mass. Marcus parked the truck and cut the engine. For a long moment he just sat there, staring at the ruin in front of him, Eli's mocking words echoing in his head. A death trap. That's what he'd called it, and looking at it now, Marcus couldn't argue. Emma opened her door and stepped out into the snow without waiting. She moved toward the cabin slowly, her small boots leaving prints in the fresh powder, the stuffed rabbit dangling from one hand. Marcus followed, his breath misting in the cold air, the temperature dropping fast as evening approached. The front door was swollen and warped, the wood cracked in several places. Marcus fitted the rusty key into the lock and turned it with effort. The lock gave with a grinding sound, and he pushed the door open, hinges shrieking. The smell hit him immediately. Damp earth, mold, and something else. Something metallic and wrong. He fumbled for his phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping the beam across the interior. One large room served as living area, kitchen, and dining space, with a doorway leading to what he assumed was a bedroom. A wood stove sat in the center, cold and dark, surrounded by warped floorboards. Mismatched furniture leaned at odd angles, a sagging sofa, a table with two chairs, shelves lined with rusted cans and broken dishes. Dust floated in the flashlight beam, thick as fog. Marcus stepped inside, floorboards creaking under his weight, and Emma followed, her small form barely visible in the gloom. That's when he saw the blood. Dark streaks stained the wooden floor near the back wall, almost hidden under a layer of dust, but unmistakable once he focused the light on them. Dried and old, but blood nonetheless. His cop instincts kicked in, and he knelt, examining the pattern. Drag marks, as if something injured had pulled itself across the floor, heading toward a gap in the boards near the wall. He traced the path with his light and found more. Paw prints pressed into the dirt between the floorboards. Large and deep, the claws leaving distinct gouges. Emma's voice shattered the silence. So unexpected that Marcus jerked upright, heart hammering. Her whisper barely carried across the room, but the words were clear, the first she'd spoken in 8 months. "Daddy, look." He turned. She was pointing at the gap in the floorboards, her small finger steady despite the trembling that ran through her frame. Her blue eyes were wide, focused with an intensity he hadn't seen since before Sarah died. Marcus moved to her side, crouching down. He pulled his pocket knife and pried at the loose board, the wood coming away easily, nails rusted through. He set it aside and shone his light into the space beneath the cabin. The beam caught movement, a shifting of shadows, and then he saw her. A German shepherd lay curled in the crawl space, her body so thin that ribs showed through matted fur caked with dried blood and dirt. One hind leg was swollen, twisted at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. Her amber eyes caught the light and held it, reflecting back with an intelligence that seemed too aware, too knowing for an animal. Beside her, pressed against her emaciated body, were three tiny puppies, their eyes still closed, squirming blindly for warmth and milk. The shepherd tried to lift her head but fell back with a weak whimper, her lips pulled back, showing teeth in what might have been a warning growl or simply the last reflex of a dying animal. Marcus held very still, his mind racing through possibilities. A stray, injured, and seeking shelter to give birth. But the tattoo visible on her ears suggested otherwise. A series of numbers partially obscured by dirt. K9 22847. Emma's next words stopped his heart. She leaned forward, one hand reaching toward the gap despite Marcus's instinctive grab for her wrist. Her voice, unused for so long, came out rough but clear. Shadow. That's Shadow. Marcus stared at his daughter. Emma, how do you... Mommy talked about Shadow on the phone before... She couldn't finish, but her meaning was clear. Marcus's blood went cold. Sarah had never mentioned a dog named Shadow to him, never mentioned canine work beyond her official duties training police dogs for the department. But Emma didn't lie, and the certainty in her voice was absolute. He looked back at the shepherd, at the intelligence in those amber eyes, and felt the first stirring of something beyond confusion, something closer to dread. The dog's breathing was shallow and rapid. Without intervention, she'd be dead by morning, and the puppies would follow soon after. Marcus had seen enough death to recognize its approach. He thought about walking away, about closing the board and pretending he'd never looked, about taking Emma back to the truck and driving until the gas ran out. But Emma was watching him, and he saw in her expression a desperate hope that he couldn't bear to crush. His voice came out steadier than he felt. Stay here. He moved to the truck, pulled a blanket from the supplies in the bed, and returned. Carefully, he reached into the crawl space, speaking in low, soothing tones the way he had heard Sarah do with frightened animals. The shepherd growled again, weaker this time, but didn't snap when his hands slid beneath her body. She was lighter than he expected, nothing but bone and fur, and he lifted her out slowly, cradling her broken leg to minimize pain. Emma gathered the puppies into her coat, holding them against her chest with a tenderness that made Marcus's throat tight. He laid the shepherd on the blanket near the wood stove, then set about building a fire with wood he found stacked against the cabin's exterior. The wood was dry enough, and within minutes flames crackled in the stove, throwing heat and light across the room. Emma sat cross-legged beside the dog, the puppies squirming in her lap, and whispered things Marcus couldn't hear. The shepherd's eyes tracked Emma's movements, her body relaxing incrementally, as if she recognized something in the girl's voice. Marcus knelt and examined the injuries more closely. The broken leg was old, weeks at least, set badly and healed wrong. Deep scratches ran along the dog's flank, and when he brushed back the fur on her neck, he found a scar in the shape of a cross, too precise to be accidental. A knife wound, deliberately inflicted. The realization made his hands shake with a fury he hadn't felt since Sarah's funeral, when he'd wanted to tear the world apart for taking her. He cleaned the wounds as best he could with bottled water and a torn shirt, then fashioned a better splint from kindling and strips of cloth. The shepherd endured it without protest, only a slight whimper escaping when he tightened the binding. Emma watched everything, her small hands stroking the dog's head, and Marcus saw color returning to her pale cheeks for the first time in months. By the time he finished, full darkness had fallen outside, and the temperature had plummeted. Marcus secured the door and windows as well as he could, stuffing gaps with rags to keep out the wind. The cabin remained cold, except for the immediate area around the stove, but it was shelter, and for tonight that would have to be enough. He opened cans of soup from the truck supplies and heated them on the stove's flat top. Emma ate mechanically, her attention never leaving the wall and her puppies. Marcus forced down his own meal, his mind churning. Shadow. The name meant something, connected to Sarah in ways he didn't understand. The dog's training, her injuries, the fact that she'd somehow ended up here beneath this specific cabin that Sarah had apparently rented under a false name, it added up to a picture Marcus couldn't yet see clearly. He thought about Eli's warning, about the cabin's history of owners who never lasted, and wondered what role the real estate agent played in all of this. The shepherd slept fitfully, her body twitching as if haunted by dreams. Emma curled up beside her, the puppies tucked between them, and for the first time since the accident, Marcus saw his daughter's face relax into something approaching peace. He sat on the sagging sofa, the springs digging into his back, and stared at the fire until his eyes burned. Around midnight, sound pulled him from a doze he hadn't meant to fall into. Not the wind, not the settling of old wood, but deliberate footsteps on the porch outside. Heavy boots, moving with purpose. Marcus was on his feet instantly, adrenaline spiking, his hand reaching for the service weapon that was no longer on his hip. He'd left it locked in a case in the truck, a habit from the days when coming home meant disarming first. Now he grabbed the poker from beside the stove, its weight familiar and solid. The footsteps stopped at the door. A long silence followed, then 3 deliberate knocks, each one echoing in the cabin's stillness. Shadow's head came up, her lips pulling back in a snarl that was all the more menacing for its silence. Emma stirred but didn't wake. Marcus moved to the door, poker raised, and called out, "Who's there?" A voice answered from the other side, rough and familiar even through the wooden barrier. "Just checking on my newest client, Reed, making sure you survived your first night." Eli Hawkins. Marcus's jaw clenched. He opened the door a crack, keeping his body blocking the entrance. The real estate agent stood on the porch, illuminated by the moon reflecting off snow. He'd changed from the business casual he'd worn earlier to outdoor gear, heavy coat, and boots suited for mountain travel. His expression was unreadable in the shadows, but something about his posture suggested coiled tension, like an animal ready to spring. Eli's gaze moved past Marcus, searching the cabin's interior. His eyes locked onto Shadow, and for just a moment, his carefully maintained mask slipped. Recognition flashed across his face, followed by something darker. Hunger, maybe, or vindication. When he spoke again, his voice carried an edge it hadn't held before. "Found yourself a stray, I see. German Shepherd. Looks half dead." Marcus shifted to block the view. "What do you want, Hawkins?" "Like I said, checking in." Eli's smile returned, cold and sharp. "This cabin has a way of surprising people. Thought I'd make sure you hadn't broken your neck falling through rotten floorboards, or something equally unfortunate." His attention returned to Shadow, and the intensity there made Marcus's instincts scream danger. "That dog, where'd you find her?" "Under the cabin. She's injured. We're taking care of her." "Interesting." Eli took a step closer to the threshold. "Mind if I come in? Take a look?" Marcus blocked him with his body, the poker still in his hand, positioned where Eli couldn't miss it. "Actually, I do mind. It's late, we're settling in, and I don't recall inviting you." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Eli's eyes were dark, calculation moving behind them like shadows behind glass. Then he stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. "Suit yourself. Just being neighborly." He turned to leave, then paused at the top of the porch steps. "One more thing, Reed. That dog, she belonged to you?" "She does now." Eli's laugh was low and unpleasant. "We'll see about that." He descended the steps and walked toward the darkness beyond the truck, his form disappearing between the trees. Marcus waited until the sound of footsteps faded completely before closing and barring the door. His hands were shaking, whether from adrenaline or cold he couldn't tell. Shadow had risen to a sitting position despite her injuries, her amber eyes fixed on the door, every muscle in her body taut. A low growl rumbled in her chest, continuous and threatening. Emma woke and wrapped her arms around the dog's neck, whispering into her fur. The growl subsided, but Shadow's vigilance didn't waver. Marcus returned to the sofa and sat heavily. Sleep wouldn't come now, not with Eli's words echoing in his head and the dog's reaction confirming his worst suspicions. Shadow wasn't just a stray, she was something Eli wanted, something worth traveling up a mountain at midnight to check on. Which meant this cabin, this $5 purchase, had been a setup from the start. But for what purpose and what role Sarah had played in all of it, Marcus couldn't begin to guess. He fed more wood into the stove and watched the flames dance. Emma had fallen back asleep, her breathing soft and even, one hand resting on Shadow's back. The dog remained alert, her gaze shifting between the door and Marcus, as if assessing whether he could be trusted to protect what mattered. He met those amber eyes and saw in them something he recognized from his years on the force, the look of a survivor who'd been through hell and wasn't about to go back without a fight. Morning came gray and cold, dawn light filtering through the cracked windows to reveal the cabin's full disrepair. Marcus had dozed intermittently, jerking awake at every creak and groan of settling wood, his mind unable to rest. Emma stirred first, checking on the puppies who had somehow survived the night against their mother's warmth. Shadow watched the girl with an intensity that went beyond animal instinct, her amber eyes tracking every movement. Marcus stood and stretched, his back protesting the night spent on the broken sofa. He needed to assess their situation in daylight, figure out what could be salvaged and what required immediate attention. But before he could move toward the door, a knock came again, different from Eli's aggressive pounding, gentler but still firm. Shadow's ears pricked forward, but she didn't growl. Marcus opened the door to find an elderly man standing on the porch, thin and wiry with white hair and deeply lined brown skin that spoke of decades spent outdoors. He held a wooden toolbox in one weathered hand and wore overalls under a canvas coat. His dark eyes were sharp despite his age, missing nothing as they swept across Marcus's haggard face and the cabin's interior visible beyond. His voice came out accented, the rhythm of someone whose first language wasn't English. "I am Harold Chen. People call me Hal. I live down the road, about 2 miles through the trees." He gestured vaguely eastward. "Saw smoke from your chimney yesterday. Thought I should introduce myself." Marcus relaxed slightly, but kept his hand on the doorframe. "Marcus Reed, my daughter Emma's inside. We just moved in." Hal's expression shifted to something between surprise and concern. "You bought this place? From who?" "Real estate agent named Eli Hawkins. Paid $5 for it." The old man's face went very still. When he spoke again, his voice carried weight. $5. That's what he's asking now." He set down the toolbox. "Mr. Reed, I think we should talk. May I come in?" Something about Hal's manner, the directness combined with genuine worry, made Marcus step aside. The old man entered slowly, his gaze sweeping the cabin's interior with the familiarity of someone who'd been here before. Then he saw Shadow, and his weathered face went pale. He stopped dead, one hand reaching out to grip the back of a chair for support. His voice came, barely above a whisper. "Jesus Christ. Shadow. She's alive." Emma looked up from where she sat beside the dog, her blue eyes curious, but cautious. Shadow's tail moved slightly, not quite away, but an acknowledgement, as if she recognized the old carpenter. Marcus's pulse quickened. "You know this dog?" Hal moved closer, slowly, his hands visible and non-threatening. He knelt with effort, his joints creaking, and extended one hand toward Shadow. The dog sniffed carefully, then allowed him to touch her head. Hal's eyes were wet when he looked back at Marcus. "I know her because Sarah Reed hired me to work on this cabin 3 years ago. She brought Shadow here and told me if anything happened to her, I should protect the dog." The name struck Marcus like a physical blow. "Sarah Reed, my wife. You knew my wife?" "I didn't know she was married to you, not at first. She used the name Anna Morrison when she rented this place. Paid me cash to do repairs, make it livable. She came here maybe once a month, always with Shadow, always checking that everything was secure." Hal's hand continued to stroke the dog's head, and Shadow leaned into the touch. "About 6 months before the accident, Sarah came here frightened, really frightened. She told me someone was hunting Shadow, that the dog knew things that could get them both killed. She made me promise that if she died, and if you and Emma found your way here, I'd help you. She said the cabin was insurance, a safe place she'd prepared." Marcus's legs felt weak. He lowered himself onto the sofa, his mind reeling. Sarah rented this cabin, under a fake name, 3 years ago. Yes, but she didn't just rent it. About a year before the accident, she bought it outright, paid cash, kept the purchase quiet. I helped her with the paperwork, off the books. Hal's expression darkened. Then Eli Hawkins showed up, started asking questions about the property, claiming he was a real estate consultant. Sarah told me not to trust him, said he was dangerous. After she died, I thought Shadow was gone too. But here she is, and here you are, which means Sarah's plan worked, even if she didn't survive to see it. Emma's voice cut through the heavy silence, small but clear. "Mommy knew we'd come here." Hal turned to the girl, his lined face softening. "Your mother was very smart, little one. She prepared for the worst and hoped for the best. This cabin was her backup plan, her emergency shelter. She wanted you and your father to have somewhere safe if things went wrong. He looked at Marcus. Eli selling you this place for $5. That was a lie. The property isn't his to sell. It belongs to Sarah Reed's estate, which means it belongs to you. The implications crashed over Marcus like a wave. Sarah had bought this cabin, hidden it from him, prepared it as some kind of refuge, which meant she'd known danger was coming, known far enough in advance to make contingency plans. And Eli, pretending to sell what he didn't own, was part of whatever threat had killed her. Marcus forced his voice steady. Why would Eli do that? What does he want? Hal's gaze moved to Shadow. The same thing he's wanted since Sarah exposed him 3 years ago. Revenge. And whatever Shadow knows that made him turn traitor in the first place. Before Marcus could ask what that meant, Emma made a sound, a small gasp of discovery. She'd been searching through the nest of rags and straw where Shadow had sheltered, and now she held something up to the light filtering through the window. A piece of red fabric, filthy and torn, but unmistakable in its color. Embroidered along one edge in uneven stitches were 2 letters, S+M. Marcus knew that scarf. Sarah had worn it the day of the accident, wrapped around her neck against the February cold. The police had told him they hadn't recovered it from the crash site, that it must have been lost or stolen by passers-by before the authorities arrived. But here it was, in Shadow's nest, beneath the cabin Sarah had secretly owned. He took the scarf from Emma's trembling hands, the fabric rough against his palms. Sarah had embroidered it herself during their first winter together, her hands clumsy with the needle but determined. The stitches were crooked, charming in their imperfection. He remembered teasing her about it, and she'd laughed, saying the crooked stitches meant the love was handmade and therefore more real. Hal's voice was gentle. She was here, night before the accident. I saw her truck pull up around midnight. She went into the cabin with Shadow, stayed maybe an hour, then left. Alone. Shadow was already injured then, limping badly. Sarah told me she'd hidden something here, something that would explain everything if she didn't come back. She said if you came looking, I should tell you to trust Shadow, that the dog would know. Marcus's hands were shaking. Sarah had known, had driven here the night before her death, left Shadow and this scarf as markers, breadcrumbs for him to follow. But follow to what? What had she hidden that was worth dying to protect? Emma had gone very still, her young face pale with understanding beyond her years. She whispered not to Marcus or Hal, but to Shadow, words so soft they were almost inaudible. You were with her. You saw everything. Shadow's amber eyes fixed on the girl, and for a moment the room held its breath. Then the dog moved, despite her injuries, pulling herself across the floor toward the back corner where the wood stove sat. She nosed at the floorboards there, whining, scratching with her good front paw. Marcus followed, kneeling beside her, and saw what he'd missed in last night's darkness. More loose boards, deliberately pried up and set back in place. He pulled them away and shone his phone's flashlight into the space beneath. There, wrapped in plastic and buried in loose dirt, was a metal box, military grade, sealed against moisture. His heart hammered as he lifted it out, brushing away soil. The box was locked, but the lock was simple, designed for a small key. Sarah's key, the one she'd kept on her keychain, the one Marcus still carried in his pocket 8 months after her death, because throwing it away felt like abandoning her completely. He pulled out his keys. The small silver key he'd assumed was for a gym locker or desk drawer slid into the box's lock and turned smoothly. The lid opened with a click that echoed in the silent cabin. Inside, carefully arranged, were items that made Marcus's blood run cold. A USB drive in a waterproof case, a leather journal, its pages filled with Sarah's handwriting, a map of Pine Ridge and the surrounding area, marked with botched red X's, photographs of Eli Hawkins meeting with a dark-haired man in expensive clothes, money changing hands, both men's faces clear in the telephoto lens, and beneath it all, Shadow's old collar, worn and stained, with something sewn into the leather's interior, a small rectangular bulge that Marcus's fingers identified immediately as a micro SD card. Hal had moved closer, looking over Marcus's shoulder. His breath hissed between his teeth. She did it. She actually built a case. Marcus pulled out the journal, opening it to the first page. Sarah's handwriting stared up at him, precise and controlled, even when the content was anything but. If you're reading this, I'm dead. Not an accident, not bad luck. Murdered probably by Eli Hawkins or someone working for Victor Reyes. I've spent 3 years building evidence against them, using Shadow to track their operations. Eli turned traitor 2 years into my canine training program, started selling information to Reyes' drug network. Shadow found 4 of their major caches. Eli found out I knew. He threatened me, threatened you and Emma. I couldn't risk going to the authorities without proof. Couldn't risk Eli's connections in the department burying the investigation. So I hid Shadow here, created this backup plan. If you found this, Marcus, it means I failed to protect myself but succeeded in protecting what matters. Trust Shadow. She knows everything. The evidence is in this box and in her collar. Take it to Agent Miller at FBI Denver. Only him. There are others in the department Eli owns. I love you. I love Emma. Finish what I started. Marcus's vision blurred. He closed the journal carefully and looked at Shadow, who watched him with those impossibly aware amber eyes. Not just a dog, a witness, a partner Sarah had trained and trusted with her life, with their lives. And Eli knew, had always known, which was why he'd staged the fake sale, why he'd come to the cabin last night. He was hunting Shadow, trying to recover the evidence before Marcus could discover it. Hal's hand gripped Marcus's shoulder, firm and grounding. What do you want to do? Marcus looked at Emma, at his daughter who'd finally spoken after 8 months of silence, who'd recognized Shadow by name because Sarah had mentioned the dog in her final weeks. He thought about the medical bills, the lost job, the eviction, all the ways his life had come apart. And he thought about Sarah driving through the night to hide evidence that would cost her everything, making sure that even in death she'd protect her family. His voice came out steady, harder than it had been in months. I'm going to finish it. Whatever Sarah started, I'm going to see it through. He looked at Hal. Will you help? The old carpenter nodded slowly. Sarah asked me to protect Shadow if she died. Protecting you and Emma is the same thing. I'm in. Emma spoke then, her voice small but determined. Shadow stays with us, no matter what. Marcus pulled his daughter close, kissed the top of her head. Shadow stays with us. I promise. Outside, the morning sun broke through the cloud cover, throwing golden light across the snow-covered clearing. Marcus had come to this cabin as a desperate man with nothing left to lose, a $5 gamble born of rock bottom. Now he understood Sarah's gift wasn't the cabin itself, but what she'd hidden beneath it. Purpose, truth, and a chance to fight back against the people who'd destroyed his family. The road ahead would be dangerous. Eli wouldn't stop, and neither would whoever had ordered Sarah's death. But Marcus had spent 23 years as a cop, had stared down armed suspects and walked into situations that would break lesser men. He'd lost his wife, his job, his home. He wouldn't lose his daughter, and he wouldn't let Sarah's sacrifice be for nothing. He stood, gathering the box and its contents, and met Hal's eyes. I need to know everything. Sarah's plan, Eli's connections, what we're up against. Start from the beginning. Hal settled into one of the rickety chairs and began to talk. Emma sat beside Shadow, her small hands stroking the dog's fur, and for the first time since Sarah's funeral, Marcus allowed himself to feel something beyond grief. Anger, yes, white-hot and clarifying. White-hot, but also determination. The kind of cold resolve that had made him a good cop, that had kept him alive through the worst Denver had to offer. Sarah had prepared the battlefield. Now it was his fight to finish. The cabin that had looked like a ruin when he arrived felt different now. Not salvation exactly, but a fortress. The walls Sarah had built to protect what she loved most. Marcus would hold those walls, would uncover the truth she'd died defending, would make sure the people responsible understood exactly what it cost to come after his family. The $5 cabin had bought him more than shelter. It had bought him war, and Marcus Reed intended to win it. Hal's story unfolded through the morning like a map of treachery, each detail another marker on a trail that led back to Sarah's death. The old carpenter spoke with the precision of someone who'd spent years watching, listening, storing information against future need. 3 years ago, Sarah had approached him through mutual acquaintances in Pine Ridge's small community, asking for carpentry work on a cabin she wanted kept secret. She'd paid cash, double his normal rate, and made him swear not to mention her real name to anyone. The work had been extensive, reinforcing the foundation, replacing rotted floorboards, creating the hidden space beneath the stove where they'd found the metal box. Sarah had supervised every detail, checking measurements herself, testing the hiding places and to ensure they would withstand casual inspection. Hal had liked her immediately, recognized in her the same practical competence he'd spent a lifetime cultivating. She hadn't treated him as just hired labor, but as a partner in something important, though she'd been careful never to explain exactly what. Only later, after months of work, had she begun to reveal pieces. The cabin was insurance against people who wanted her silent. Shadow was more than a pet, more even than a working canine. The dog had been trained for operations that existed off official books, tracking operations that had put major drug networks in federal crosshairs. Eli Hawkins had been Sarah's colleague once, another handler in Denver PD's K-9 unit, before he'd been caught selling information to the very criminals they were supposed to be hunting. Marcus listened, the journal open in his lap, cross-referencing Hal's account against Sarah's written words. Emma sat close enough that her shoulder pressed against his, Shadow's head resting on the girl's legs. The puppies had nursed and fallen asleep in a tangled pile, their tiny bodies rising and falling with each breath. Hal's voice grew quieter as he reached the harder parts. 6 months before the accident, Sarah came here terrified, really terrified, in a way I hadn't seen before. She told me Eli had found out she'd documented his betrayal, that he'd threatened to kill her if she went to authorities. But she couldn't stay quiet because Eli's handler, a man named Victor Reyes, was responsible for the fentanyl flooding Denver's streets. Hundreds dead, maybe thousands. Sarah said she couldn't live with herself if she did nothing, even if doing something meant dying. The words landed like stones in Marcus's chest. His wife had known the risk, had calculated the odds, and chosen action over safety. He thought about all the nights she'd come home late, claiming extra training sessions or paperwork. How many of those nights had she spent here, building this case, preparing for the worst? Hal continued. The night before the accident, she brought Shadow up one last time. The dog was already injured, limping badly. Sarah said there'd been an altercation, that Eli had tried to take Shadow and things got violent. She'd fought him off but knew time was running out. She hid Shadow here, left the scarf as a marker you'd recognize, and told me if she didn't come back within a week, I should assume the worst. Marcus's jaw clenched. Why didn't you go to the police after the accident? Because Sarah told me not to trust anyone in the department except Agent Miller at FBI. She said Eli had informants everywhere, people who owed him favors or feared him enough to stay quiet. If I'd gone to local police, word would have reached Eli within hours. Hal's weathered hands twisted together. I've spent 8 months wondering if I made the right choice, staying silent. But Sarah's instructions were clear. Wait for you. She believed you'd come eventually, that you'd figure out the cabin was important. Marcus wanted to be angry at the old man's inaction, but he understood the logic. Sarah had orchestrated this carefully, trusting that Marcus's cop instincts would lead him here once everything else fell apart. She'd gambled on his desperation, on the $5 listing being strange enough to catch his attention. And she'd been right. He pulled out the USB drive from the metal box, turned it over in his hands. We need to see what's on this, and the SD card in Shadow's collar. Hal nodded. Margaret Walsh runs the coffee shop in town. She's got a computer, and she's someone Sarah trusted. Former nurse helped deliver half the babies in Pine Ridge. If we're going to look at this, her place is as safe as anywhere. Marcus checked his phone. No signal this deep in the mountains. He'd need to drive closer to town to call ahead, make sure they weren't walking into a trap. But first he had to secure the cabin, make it defensible in case Eli returned with reinforcements. The morning's revelation had transformed their situation from desperate refuge to active combat zone. He stood, his cop training reasserting itself now that he had a clear objective. Emma, I need you to stay here with Hal while I make some calls and get supplies. Can you do that? His daughter's blue eyes met his, solemn and knowing. Shadow needs food and medicine for her leg. I'll get both. Hal, you armed? The old carpenter reached into his coat and produced a revolver, old but well-maintained. Inherited from my father, I know how to use it. Good. Anyone besides me tries to get in, you put them down. I don't care who they claim to be. Marcus grabbed his jacket, checked his wallet to confirm he had the one credit card not yet maxed out. I'll be back in 2 hours, 3 at most. The drive down the mountain road felt different now, charged with purpose instead of desperation. Marcus's mind raced through tactical considerations, threat assessments, the kind of planning that had kept him alive through high-risk arrests. Eli knew they'd found Shadow, but probably didn't know about the metal box yet. That gave Marcus a narrow window to act before the situation escalated further. Cell signal returned about 20 minutes down the mountain. Marcus pulled over and dialed the number Hal had given him for Margaret Walsh. The phone rang 4 times before a woman's voice answered, cautious and measured. Walsh's coffee. Margaret Walsh? My name is Marcus Reed. Hal Chen told me to call you. It's about Sarah. Silence stretched for several seconds, then quieter. Marcus, oh God, you found the cabin. I found the cabin and I found what Sarah left there. Hal says you can help us. Says Sarah trusted you. Margaret's breath hitched audibly. She did. She was... A pause, then steel entered her voice. Come to the shop. We close at 2. Get here before then. Park in the back alley. Don't let anyone see you arrive. Marcus checked the dashboard clock. 11:30. I'll be there by 1. I need to stop for supplies first. Be careful. Eli has eyes everywhere in Pine Ridge. He'll know you went to town within an hour of your arrival. She hung up before Marcus could respond. He drove faster, hyper-aware of vehicles behind him, checking mirrors constantly. Pine Ridge appeared as the forest thinned, a mountain town that might have held 800 people if you counted generously. Main Street stretched 3 blocks, brick buildings from the mining era mixed with newer construction. A general store anchored one end, the coffee shop the other, with a gas station, hardware store, and what looked like a combination bar and restaurant filling the spaces between. Marcus parked at the general store and went in with a list forming in his mind. Dog food, medical supplies, ammunition if they carried it. The store smelled of old wood and coffee, its aisles narrow and cramped with merchandise. An elderly woman worked the register, her eyes tracking Marcus with the open curiosity of someone who knew everyone in town and immediately spotted strangers. He moved quickly, grabbing canned dog food, bandages, antiseptic, painkillers meant for humans, but appropriate for animal use in a pinch. At the ammunition counter, he requested 3 boxes of .38 Special for Hal's revolver and, after a moment's hesitation, asked if they had any shotguns in stock. The clerk's eyebrows rose, but she led him to a rack holding 4 weapons. Marcus selected a Remington 870, paid with the credit card that would probably be declined next time, and carried his purchases to the truck under the clerk's watchful gaze. The hardware store yielded 2x4s, plywood sheets, nails, and a battery-powered drill. Materials to reinforce the cabin's windows and door, to create firing positions if it came to that. Marcus worked with mechanical efficiency, his mind running scenarios. Best case, they'd get the evidence to FBI agent Miller, and Eli would be arrested before he could act. Worst case, Eli would come for Shadow with overwhelming force, and Marcus would have to hold him off long enough for Emma to escape with Hal. He checked his watch, 12:45. 15 minutes to reach the coffee shop. He loaded the truck bed, covered everything with the tarp, and drove to the alley behind Margaret Walsh's establishment as instructed. The back door opened before he could knock, and a woman appeared who could only be Margaret. Early 60s, gray hair cut short and practical, lines around her eyes that spoke of decades spent smiling before something harder had settled in. She wore an apron over jeans and a flannel shirt, her hands dusted with a flower. Her voice came low and urgent. Inside, quickly. The back room of the coffee shop held storage shelves, a small office area, and an old desktop computer on a cluttered desk. Margaret locked the door behind them and crossed her arms, studying Marcus with an intensity that reminded him of senior detectives evaluating rookies. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her because she nodded once, sharp and decisive. You look like hell, but you're here, which means Sarah's plan worked at least partially. She gestured to a chair. Sit. Tell me everything. Marcus recounted the last 24 hours, from signing Eli's paperwork to finding Shadow to discovering the metal box. Margaret listened without interruption, her expression growing darker as the story unfolded. When he finished, she pulled a key from around her neck and unlocked a drawer in the desk. From it, she withdrew an envelope, already addressed to Marcus Reed in Sarah's handwriting. She gave me this a year ago, told me if you ever showed up in Pine Ridge asking about her, I should give it to you immediately. Margaret held the envelope carefully, like it might detonate. I've wanted to open it every day since the accident, but Sarah's instructions were specific, for your eyes only. Marcus took the envelope, his hand steady despite the hammer of his pulse. Inside was a single page, dated 14 months before Sarah's death. Marcus, if you're reading this at Margaret's shop, you found the cabin in Shadow. You know I'm dead. You probably think I kept too many secrets, and you're right. But some secrets keep people alive, at least temporarily. Eli Hawkins was my partner for 2 years before I realized he was selling us out. By the time I had proof, he'd already embedded himself deep enough in the department that going through official channels would have gotten me killed faster. So I built this backup plan. The USB drive has video evidence of Eli meeting with Victor Reyes, financial records, everything FBI needs for RICO charges. But the real insurance is Shadow's collar. There's an SD card sewn into the leather with footage from the dashboard camera in my car the night Eli tried to kill me the first time, 3 months before the actual crash. He ran me off Route 40, tried to make it look like an accident. I survived, but I knew then that he wouldn't stop. The second attempt succeeded. Make him pay. Make them all pay. Agent Richard Miller, FBI Denver Field Office. Only him. Tell him Operation Silent Track. He'll understand. I love you. Keep Emma safe. Marcus read it twice, the words blurring the second time as rage and grief collided in his chest. Eli had tried to murder Sarah twice. The first attempt had failed, bought her 3 months to prepare, but the second time on Highway 70 had finished what he'd started. And Marcus had believed it was an accident, had spent 8 months drowning in guilt and loss without knowing his wife had been fighting a war he couldn't see. Margaret's voice cut through his fury, soft but insistent. What do you need? Computer, we need to see what's on these drives. He pulled the USB and Shadow's collar from his jacket pocket, the leather worn and stained with old blood. And then I need a secure line to call FBI Denver. Margaret powered on the computer, an old machine that took several minutes to boot up. While they waited, she made coffee, strong and black, and set a cup in front of Marcus without asking if he wanted it. The familiar ritual helped anchor him, gave his hands something to do besides shake. The computer finally loaded. Marcus inserted the USB drive, and after a moment of loading, a folder appeared containing 12 video files, each labeled with dates spanning 2 years. He opened the first one. The footage showed a parking garage, shot from a fixed position, timestamp in the corner indicating late evening. 2 men in turret frame, Eli Hawkins, recognizable despite the grainy quality, and another man Marcus had never seen, dark-haired and expensively dressed even in casual clothes. They spoke too quietly for the audio to capture, but the exchange was clear. Eli handed over a folder. The other man passed him an envelope thick with what had to be cash. Marcus clicked through the other files. Each one documented similar meetings, the transactions becoming bolder, moving from parking garages to restaurant back rooms to what looked like a warehouse. In video 8, Eli was shown with uniformed officers Marcus recognized from Denver PD, all of them accepting payment from Victor Reyes' people. Sarah's voiceover narration played on several files, calm and professional as she identified each participant, linked them to specific drug busts that had mysteriously failed or evidence that had disappeared before trial. The final video made Marcus's blood freeze. It showed Sarah herself recording a statement to camera with Shadow sitting beside her. The timestamp read 3 weeks before her death. Her voice was steady, but her eyes held the knowledge of someone who'd already accepted the inevitable. My name is Sarah Reed, K-9 handler for Denver Police Department. This statement is being made freely and without coercion. For the past 2 years, I've been documenting criminal conspiracy involving Officer Eli Hawkins and members of the Victor Reyes drug organization. Hawkins has been selling information about police operations, evidence storage locations, and confidential informant identities. His actions have resulted in at least 8 failed prosecutions in the murders of 2 informants. I've brought this information to Internal Affairs, but was told insufficient evidence existed to proceed. I believe Hawkins has corrupted elements of IA itself. Therefore, I'm creating this backup record and hiding my canine partner Shadow, who has been trained to track Reyes's fentanyl shipments. If you're watching this, I'm likely dead. Please ensure this evidence reaches Agent Richard Miller at FBI. He's the only person I trust to act on it. Take care of Shadow. She's earned her retirement. The video ended. Marcus sat motionless, staring at his wife's frozen image on the screen. Margaret had moved to stand behind him, one hand resting on his shoulder in silent solidarity. Her voice came thick with emotion. Sarah was the bravest person I've known. She came here sometimes, to talk, to plan. She knew what was coming, but wouldn't run because running meant letting Reyes kill more people with poison drugs. She chose to fight, even though fighting meant dying. Marcus ejected the USB drive and picked up Shadow's collar. The SD card was indeed sewn into the leather's inner layer, visible only when he split the seam with Margaret's scissors. He cleaned it carefully and inserted it into the computer's card reader. The footage that loaded was dashboard camera video, date stamped 3 months before Sarah's death. The perspective showed Route 40 at night, Sarah's hands visible on the steering wheel, Shadow in the passenger seat. For 5 minutes, nothing happened except normal driving. Then headlights appeared behind them, approaching fast. Too fast. Sarah's voice came clearly. That's Eli's truck. He's been following it for 10 miles. The headlights grew closer, filling the frame. Sarah accelerated, her voice tight but controlled. Engaging emergency protocol. If I don't survive this, the cabin has everything you need. Marcus, I'm sorry. Emma, Mommy loves you. The truck behind them surged forward and struck Sarah's vehicle from behind, hard enough to make the camera shake. Sarah fought the wheel, trying to maintain control, but the second impact came harder, angled to force her toward the guardrail. The camera caught the moment her car broke through, the sickening lurch as it plunged down the embankment. Then the screen went black, though audio continued. Shadow barking, Sarah's labored breathing, the hiss of a radiator dying. Sarah's last words before the file ended. Shadow, run. Find Marcus. Marcus couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The evidence was absolute, irrefutable. Eli had tried to murder his wife, had failed, and Sarah had kept this footage secret, knowing it was the only proof that would stand up in court. She'd hidden Shadow, hidden the evidence, and bought time with her own life. Margaret's grip on his shoulder tightened. What do you want to do? Marcus's voice came out flat, cold with the kind of rage that burned all heat away. I want to bury Eli Hawkins so deep he never sees daylight again. But first, I need to call Agent Miller. Margaret produced a cell phone from her pocket. Satellite phone, untraceable, or as untraceable as anything can be these days. FBI's Denver number is already programmed in. Marcus took the phone and dialed. The line rang 3 times before a professional male voice answered. FBI Denver, how may I direct your call? Ohionet Richard Miller. Tell him it's about Operation Silent Track. A pause, then the sound of a transfer. 30 seconds later, a different voice came on the line, harder and more cautious. This is Miller. Who am I speaking with? Marcus Reed, Sarah Reed's husband. The silence stretched long enough that Marcus thought the connection had dropped. Then Miller's voice returned, urgent now. Marcus Reed, Jesus Christ, where are you? Pine Ridge, Colorado. I found what Sarah hid. All of it. The evidence against Hawkins, she actually completed it? Video, financial records, dashboard cam footage of him trying to kill her. It's all here. And it's airtight. Miller's breath hissed between his teeth. I've been trying to build a case against Hawkins for 3 years. Sarah was my best source, and when she died, I thought everything died with her. You're telling me she left a complete package? Complete enough to bury him and everyone connected to Reyes. But I need extraction, Agent Miller. Hawkins knows I'm here, knows I found Sarah's canine. He'll come for the evidence, and when he does, my daughter's in the crossfire. Give me your exact location. Marcus rattled off the cabin's coordinates, pulled from the deed paperwork in the metal box. Miller copied them down, and Marcus heard typing in the background. Okay, I can have a team there in 6 hours. Can you hold position that long? Marcus thought about the cabin's condition, the supplies he'd bought, Hal's revolver, and the shotgun in his truck. 6 hours was an eternity when someone like Eli was hunting you, but it was also manageable if they fortified properly. We can hold, but Miller, you need to know something else. Sarah believed Hawkins has people inside Denver PD, possibly inside your own office. She specifically said to trust only you. I know. I've been running my investigation off the books for that exact reason. The team I'm sending is hand-picked, people I trust absolutely. They'll extract you, your daughter, and the evidence. After that, we move fast before Hawkins's network can react. Miller paused. Marcus, I'm sorry about Sarah. She was trying to do the right thing, and it got her killed. That shouldn't have happened. No, it shouldn't have. But she made sure it counted for something. That's what matters now. 6 hours. Keep your head down, stay armed, and don't open the door for anyone except the team I send. Identification will be Agent Sarah Chen, and she'll use the phrase, silent track is active. That's how you'll know they're legitimate. Understood. 6 hours. Marcus ended the call and handed the phone back to Margaret. His mind was already running through defensive preparations, calculating angles of approach to the cabin, identifying choke points. 6 hours meant fortifying before Eli realized federal agents were inbound. It meant keeping Emma and Shadow alive through whatever came next. Margaret moved to a cabinet and pulled out a rifle case. Inside was a Winchester hunting rifle, well-maintained, with a box of ammunition. Take it, I'm a decent shot, but you'll make better use of it than me. You might need it yourself. Eli finds out you helped me. I'm leaving town for a few days. Got a sister in Grand Junction who's been begging me to visit. Time to take her up on it. Margaret's jaw set with determination. Sarah died protecting people she'd never met from drugs that were killing them. Least I can do is make sure her sacrifice means something. Marcus accepted the rifle, checking the action automatically. The weapon was clean, sighted properly, ready to use. Combined with the shotgun and Hal's revolver, they had enough firepower to make Eli think twice about a frontal assault. Thank you for everything. Thanks, Sarah. She's the one who planned this out, made sure everyone had their role to play. Margaret walked him to the back door, checked the alley was clear. Go, get back to your daughter. And Marcus? Make him pay. Make all of them pay. The drive back to the cabin felt like threading through enemy territory, every vehicle a potential threat, every blind curve a place for ambush. Marcus kept the rifle on the passenger seat, safety off, ready to bring it to bear in seconds. His cop instincts screamed that he was being watched, followed, but he saw no evidence of pursuit. Maybe Eli was regrouping, maybe gathering forces for a proper assault. Either way, Marcus needed to be ready. Hal had the cabin door barricaded when Marcus arrived, only opening it after visual confirmation through a gap in the boards. Emma sat with Shadow, feeding the dog canned food mixed with water to make it easier to digest. The puppies had woken and were exploring in wobbly circles, bumping into furniture and each other with the clumsy determination of very young animals. Marcus unloaded the truck rapidly, carrying supplies inside while Hal kept watch. Once everything was secured, Marcus began the work of fortification. Plywood over windows, reinforced from inside with the 2x4s. The door got similar treatment, heavy boards nailed across its width to prevent forced entry. He created firing positions at 2 windows facing different approaches, stacking furniture to provide cover while allowing clear lines of sight. Hal worked beside him, measuring and cutting with the precision of his trade. You called the FBI? Agent Miller, he's sending a team. 6 hours. The old carpenter whistled low. That's a long time to hold against someone like Hawkins if he decides to move before then. I know, but it's what we've got. Marcus finished nailing a board and moved to the next window. Hal, if things go bad, your job is to get Emma out. There's a back window in the bedroom we're leaving unboarded. You take her, you take Shadow and the puppies, you run into the forest and don't stop until you hit the next town. Understood? Hal's weathered face was grim. I understand, but I didn't survive 70 years by running from fights, Marcus. I'll protect Emma with my life if it comes to that. But I'm not abandoning you to face Hawkins alone. Emma's voice cut through the cabin, clear and firm in a way it hadn't been since before Sarah's death. Nobody's running. This is our home now. We fight for it. Marcus turned to his daughter, seeing in her young face a determination that reminded him painfully of Sarah. 10 years old and already understanding that some things were worth the risk of everything. He wanted to argue, to tell her she was too young for this, but the words died in his throat. Emma had already survived one attack that killed her mother. She'd earned the right to have a voice in what came next. Instead, he knelt beside her, meeting her eyes. If I tell you to run, you run. No arguments. Can you promise me that? Emma considered this, then nodded slowly. If you promise to come after us, I promise. The afternoon dragged toward evening, each hour feeling like 3. Marcus positioned weapons at strategic points, showed Hal how to operate the shotgun in case it became necessary, ran through emergency procedures with Emma until she could recite them without hesitation. Shadow watched it all from her position near the stove, amber eyes tracking movement with the alertness of a trained guardian. Her injuries still limited her mobility, but Marcus could see the warrior lurking beneath the wounded exterior. If Eli got through the fortifications, he'd face a K-9 who remembered her training and had every reason to want him dead. Twilight brought a visitor on her, but not the one Marcus expected. A sheriff's cruiser rolled up to the cabin, lights off, moving slowly up the rough road. Marcus's hand went to the rifle propped against the wall, but something made him hesitate. The deputy who emerged was young, maybe 30, with the careful movements of someone approaching a situation they didn't fully understand. He raised both hands in a gesture of peace before moving toward the door. His voice carried across the clearing, nervous but professional. Mr. Reed, my name is Deputy Tom Morrison. Sheriff sent me to check on you. We got a call from Eli Hawkins claiming there had been some kind of dispute about property, that you might be armed and dangerous. I'm hoping we can talk this through without anyone getting hurt. Marcus moved to the firing slit he'd cut in the door's barricade, keeping the rifle out of sight but close. Deputy, you can tell your sheriff that Eli Hawkins is a corrupt cop working for drug dealers, and the only danger I pose is to people trying to stop me from turning evidence over to the FBI. Agent Richard Miller out of Denver is sending a team to extract me and my family. You can verify that with FBI if you want. Tom Morrison's face showed genuine confusion. I don't know anything about that, sir. I just know I got orders to check on you. Make sure everything's okay. The sheriff's concerned because Hawkins said you've been making threats. Hawkins is lying. But I'll tell you what, Deputy. You call FBI Denver, ask for Agent Miller, tell him you're standing outside Marcus Reed's cabin in Pine Ridge. See what he tells you. Morrison hesitated, clearly torn between duty and self-preservation. Finally, he pulled out his radio and made the call. The response took 5 minutes, during which the deputy stood in the gathering dark, looking increasingly uncomfortable. When dispatch finally responded, Marcus couldn't hear the exact words, but could read Morrison's body language. Shock, followed by a slow nod. The deputy approached close enough to speak without shouting. Mr. Reed, I just got confirmation from FBI. Agent Miller says you're a protected witness, that I'm to secure the area and prevent anyone from approaching until federal agents arrive. He also said, Morrison paused, swallowing hard. He said if Sheriff Brennan interfered, I should consider him potentially compromised and call state police immediately. Marcus's estimation of Agent Miller rose several notches. The man had moved fast, locked down the official channels before Eli could use them. Your sheriff, one of Hawkins's people? I don't know, maybe. Jesus, I don't know who to trust anymore. Morrison looked young and lost, the kind of cop who joined the force believing in the system and was now watching it crumble. What do you need from me? Keep anyone from approaching this cabin who isn't federal. I don't care if it's other deputies, state police, anyone. FBI is handling this, and interference could get people killed. Morrison nodded slowly. I'll park my cruiser across the road. Make sure nobody gets past. But Mr. Reed, if shooting starts, I'm calling for backup. I can't just stand by. Understood. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. The deputy returned to his vehicle and repositioned it as a roadblock, lights now on, creating a barrier that would at least slow any approach. Marcus watched him for several minutes, trying to gauge whether Morrison was genuine or playing a role until backup arrived. The deputy's body language read sincere, but Marcus had seen good actors before. He'd stay alert. Hal had been watching through another firing slit, and now his voice came low and worried. Marcus, look at the tree line, northwest corner. Marcus shifted position, peering through the gap. At first he saw nothing but shadows deepening between the pines. Then movement caught his eye, a figure moving from tree to tree, staying low, approaching the cabin from an angle that kept them out of Morrison's line of sight. As Marcus watched, two more figures appeared, spreading out to create a perimeter. They moved with tactical precision, and even in the dim light, Marcus recognized the lead figure's build and posture. Eli Hawkins had come with reinforcements, and he wasn't waiting for FBI to arrive. Marcus turned to Hal. Get Emma and Shadow into the bedroom. Bar the window from inside, but keep it ready for quick exit. If I give the word, you run and don't look back. Hal didn't argue this time, just gathered Emma and helped her carry the puppies while Shadow limped behind. Marcus checked the rifle's magazine, chambered around, and moved to the window facing Eli's approach. His heart rate had slowed, entering the familiar calm that came during high-stress situations. This was what his training had prepared him for, the moment when theory became practice and hesitation got you killed. The figures had stopped advancing, holding position just inside the tree line. Marcus counted 4. Eli and 3 others, all armed with what looked like rifles or shotguns. They weren't making any effort to hide now, confident in their numbers and firepower. One of them raised a megaphone, and Eli's voice boomed across the clearing. Reed, I know you're in there with my property. Send out the bing and the evidence, and we'll let you and your kid walk away. You've got 60 seconds to decide. Marcus didn't bother responding. Eli wasn't offering a real deal, just stalling while his people maneuvered into better positions. Through the firing slit, Marcus tracked the 2 figures flanking left and right, trying to get angles on the cabin sides. He aimed carefully at a spot 6 feet in front of the left side figure and squeezed the trigger. The rifle's cracks shattered the evening quiet, the bullet kicking up snow and dirt exactly where Marcus had intended. The figure dove for cover, and both flankers froze. Marcus worked the bolt, chambered another round, and fired again toward the right side position. Same result, suppressing fire that communicated clearly he knew they were there and could hit them if he chose. Eli's voice came again, anger replacing the fake reasonableness. Wrong choice, Reed. We'll burn you out if we have to. The threat was real enough. The cabin was old, dry wood that would ignite easily, but burning it would destroy the evidence Eli wanted, which gave Marcus leverage. He called back through the door's crack, keeping his voice level and cold. You burn this cabin, you burn Sarah's USB drive and the dashboard footage of you trying to kill her on Route 40. That evidence goes to FBI in 4 hours whether I'm alive or dead. Only way you stop it is to take me alive, and I promise you, Hawkins, I won't make it easy. The silence that followed stretched taut as wire. Marcus had gambled that Eli didn't know exactly what evidence existed, only that Sarah had compiled something dangerous. The bluff about the dashboard footage seemed to land because when Eli responded, his voice carried new urgency. You're lying. Sarah didn't have camera footage. Yeah, she did. 3 months before the crime, though, you ran her off Route 40. She survived, kept the dash cam video, and added it to everything else. You're finished, Eli. Only question is whether you're stupid enough to add murdering a cop and his kid to the charges. Marcus heard heated discussion among the figures in the tree line. Voices raised in argument. Good. Dissension in enemy ranks meant someone was reconsidering the wisdom of this assault. He used the moment to check on Hal and Emma, finding them positioned in the bedroom with the window unbarred but blocked by a dresser they could shove aside in seconds. Emma's face was pale but composed. Shadow lay beside her, teeth bared in a silent snarl, directed toward the front of the cabin, where Eli's voice had come from. The dog knew who threatened them, and Marcus had no doubt she'd fight to the death to protect Emma if it came to that. The gunfire started without further warning. Eli and his people opened up on the cabin, rounds punching through the old logs, shattering glass, chewing into the furniture Marcus had stacked for cover. He dropped flat, crawling toward the firing position, and returned fire carefully. Not trying to kill yet, just keeping them pinned, making them think twice about rushing the cabin. The deputy's cruiser lit up with sirens, Morrison on the radio calling for backup, his young voice cracking with adrenaline. The assault lasted maybe 90 seconds before stopping as abruptly as it started. In the ringing silence that followed, Marcus did a quick damage assessment. Multiple rounds had penetrated the cabin's walls, but the fortifications had held. No one inside was hit. The stove had taken several impacts, denting the metal but remaining functional. They'd been lucky. Eli's voice came again, but different now, retreating, calculating. "This isn't over, Reed. You've got nowhere to run and nobody coming to save you." Marcus didn't respond, conserving ammunition and giving nothing away. Through the firing slit, he watched the figures withdraw into deeper forest, disappearing between the trees. They weren't giving up, just regrouping. The next assault would come harder and smarter. Eli had tested the cabin's defenses and found them stronger than expected. Next time he'd bring more people, better tactics, maybe wait until full dark to use night to his advantage. Morrison appeared at the edge of the clearing, taking cover behind his cruiser. His voice carried, shaken but steady. "Mr. Reed, you okay in there?" "We're fine. How long until state police arrive?" 20 minutes, and FBI says their team is 4 hours out, moving as fast as they can." 4 hours was too long. Eli would be back before then, and the cabin couldn't withstand a sustained assault by a larger force. Marcus needed to change the equation, find a way to shift from defense to offense. His eyes fell on the metal box, still bidding where he'd left it after reviewing the evidence with Margaret. Sarah had built this case, gathered this proof, died protecting it, but she'd also left something else. A map with 5 red X's marking locations around Pine Ridge. Marcus pulled out the map and studied it in the stove's light. The X's were labeled in Sarah's neat handwriting. Cache 1, Cache 2, and so on. These were Reyes's drug storage locations, the places Shadow had tracked fentanyl to over her years of operations. If Marcus could get to one of those caches, document it, he'd have physical evidence to back up Sarah's files. More importantly, he'd have leverage to force Eli's hand, make the corrupt cop come to him instead of waiting for the next assault. The nearest cache was marked 2 miles east, in a ravine accessible by Forest Service Road. 2 miles through darkness, with Eli and his people somewhere between here and there. Dangerous, bordering on suicidal. But sitting in the cabin waiting for the next attack wasn't much better. And at least this way Marcus would be moving, acting, taking initiative instead of reacting. He explained the plan to Hal, who listened with growing alarm. "That's insane. You'll be exposed, vulnerable." "I'm vulnerable here too. At least out there I can maneuver, use the terrain. And if I can get photos of Reyes's cache, the FBI has corroborating physical evidence to back up everything Sarah documented." Hal shook his head, but didn't argue further. Instead, he pulled out his keys and detached one. "My truck's parked half a mile south, hidden in the trees where Sarah used to leave her vehicle. 4-wheel drive, full tank. Take it if you need to move fast." Marcus pocketed the key, gathered the rifle and extra ammunition, and moved to the bedroom where Emma waited. His daughter looked up at him with eyes too old for her face, understanding before he spoke what he intended. Her voice came quiet but fierce. "You're going after them. I'm going to finish what your mother started. Hal's staying with you. If anything happens to me, he gets you out. FBI will protect you after that." Emma stood and wrapped her arms around his waist, holding tight. "Mom said families fight together. She told me that before the crash. She said sometimes fighting means doing the scared thing because it's the right thing." Marcus held his daughter, memorizing the feel of her in his arms, the smell of her hair, the way her small body trembled despite her brave words. "Your mom was right about everything." He kissed the top of her head and stepped back, meeting Hal's eyes across the room. The old carpenter nodded once, a promise without words. Marcus moved to the bedroom window, shoved aside the dresser, and slipped out into the night. The forest swallowed him within 10 steps, darkness and pine branches closing like a curtain. Behind him he heard Hal repositioning the furniture, securing the window again. The forest was a maze of shadow and moonlight, every sound amplified by adrenaline and fear. Marcus moved carefully, using the skills he'd learned during tactical training, during the years when he'd tracked suspects through Denver's worst neighborhoods. This was different. Wilder terrain, higher stakes, but the principles remain. Stay low, Move quietly, use cover, trust your instincts. He'd gone perhaps half a mile when he heard voices ahead. Eli and his people regrouping, arguing about the failed assault. Marcus crept closer, using a deadfall for cover, and listened. 4 distinct voices, matching what he'd observed earlier. Eli was planning a second attack for full darkness, hitting the cabin from multiple angles simultaneously to overwhelm the defenders. One of the others was arguing for waiting until reinforcements arrived from Denver, from cops on Reyes's payroll who could provide more firepower and legitimacy. Eli's response was sharp and final. "We don't have time for reinforcements. Reed's got FBI coming, and if they extract him with that evidence, we're all finished. We hit the cabin in 90 minutes, burn it if we have to, make sure nothing survives." Marcus backed away silently, his path clear now. 90 minutes before the assault, which gave him maybe an hour to reach the cache, document it, and get back to the cabin before Eli moved. Tight timeline, but workable. He found Hal's truck where the old carpenter had indicated, hidden under pine branches in a clearing Sarah had apparently used for covert meetings. The keys worked, the engine turned over smoothly, and Marcus drove without headlights, navigating by moonlight and the map's directions. The ravine appeared after 15 minutes of careful driving, exactly where Sarah had marked it. Marcus parked and approached on foot, rifle ready, every sense straining for signs of guards or surveillance. The cache itself was hidden in a cave formed by fallen boulders, accessible only through a narrow gap. He squeezed through and turned on his phone's flashlight. What he found made his breath catch. Dozens of vacuum-sealed packages stacked floor to ceiling, each marked with the chemical symbol for fentanyl. Street value in the millions, enough poison to kill thousands. This was what Sarah had been fighting, what she died trying to stop. Marcus photographed everything, documenting the packages, the cave's location, enough evidence to prove Sarah's files weren't fabricated. He was about to leave when headlights swept across the ravine above. A vehicle, approaching fast. Marcus killed his light and pressed into shadows, watching as a black SUV parked at the ravine's edge. 2 men got out, one of them speaking into a radio. Marcus couldn't hear exact words but caught the tone. Urgent, checking on something, making sure the cache was secure. The men descended into the ravine, moving toward the cave. Marcus calculated rapidly. He couldn't retreat without being seen. Couldn't fight 2 armed men in close quarters without alerting whoever they were talking to on that radio. But he also couldn't let them see him. Couldn't leave witnesses who'd warned Eli he had found the cache. He made a choice driven by desperation and necessity. As the first man squeezed through the gap into the cave, Marcus brought the rifle butt down hard on the back of his skull. The man dropped without a sound. The second man was already calling out, asking what was wrong, when Marcus hit him too. The impact solid and precise. Both men lay unconscious, breathing but immobilized for the immediate future. Marcus zip-tied their hands with supplies from his pockets, gagged them with their own shirts, and dragged them deeper into the cave where they wouldn't be immediately visible. Then he took their radio, listening to the traffic. Eli's voice came through, demanding status updates from what sounded like multiple positions. The network was bigger than Marcus had realized. Not just 4 men, but maybe a dozen, all coordinating for the assault on the cabin. The knowledge changed everything. Marcus couldn't go back to the cabin now, couldn't lead this force to where Emma and Hal waited. He needed to draw them away, make himself the target instead of his daughter. He keyed the radio and spoke in the flattest, coldest voice he could manage. "Eli, this is Marcus Reed. I'm at your cache, the one 2 miles east. Got real nice photos of about 10 million in fentanyl. FBI's gonna love this." The explosion of rage that came back almost blew the radio speaker. Eli's voice cracked with fury, coherent words dissolving into threats and curses. When he finally regained control, his words came sharp and deadly. "You're a dead man, Reed. I'm coming for you myself. And when I find you, I'm putting you in the ground next to your bitch wife." Marcus smiled without humor. "Come on then. I'll be waiting." He left the radio on the cave floor, moved back to Hal's truck, and drove deeper into the forest, leading Eli and his people away from the cabin. The FBI team would arrive in 3 hours. Emma and Hal could hold that long with only 1 or 2 watchers left behind. But Marcus, out here alone, would have to survive a manhunt by a dozen desperate men who knew these mountains and had nothing left to lose. The truck's engine roared through the night, headlights finally on now that stealth no longer mattered. Behind him, he saw answering lights converging, Eli's network mobilizing for the chase. Marcus pushed the accelerator down, the old truck bouncing over rough terrain, and prepared himself for the kind of fight that didn't end until someone was dead. The Forest Service road narrowed to little more than a trail, branches scraping metal as Marcus pushed Hal's truck deeper into terrain that hadn't seen maintenance in years. Behind him, headlights multiplied like hunting wolves' eyes, Eli's network converging with coordination that spoke of practiced pursuit. Marcus's advantage lay in desperation, in the kind of reckless momentum that came from having nothing left to protect except distance between himself and his daughter. He'd bought Emma time, drawn the predators away from the cabin, and now survival became a matter of seconds strung together until FBI arrived. The truck lurched over a washout, suspension screaming, and Marcus fought the wheel to keep from rolling. His phone showed 2 hours until the federal team reached the cabin, 2 hours during which he needed to stay alive and mobile while a dozen armed men tried to run him down. The mathematical reality was stark. He couldn't outrun them indefinitely in terrain they knew better, couldn't outfight them with superior numbers and firepower. But he could make them pay for every yard, could use the skills learned through 2 decades of police work to turn hunter into hunted. Ahead, the road dead-ended at a creek crossing, water running high from snowmelt. Marcus gunned the engine, felt the truck plunge into frigid current that came up past the wheel wells, and powered through to the opposite bank. The headlights behind him hesitated at the water's edge, buying precious seconds. He killed his own lights and turned hard right, following the creek upstream, using the water's sound to mask engine noise. A quarter-mile later, he found what he needed, a cluster of boulders large enough to hide the truck and provide defensive position. Marcus abandoned the vehicle, taking the rifle and extra ammunition, and scrambled up the boulder field to high ground. From here, he could see the approach from multiple angles, could control the terrain the way a good cop controlled a crime scene. The pursuers would have to come uphill, expose themselves, crossing open ground, bunch up in the narrow spaces between rocks. It wasn't perfect, but perfect had stopped being an option the moment he'd chosen this life over safety. The first vehicle appeared within minutes, a jacked-up pickup that forded the creek and paused, driver clearly trying to spot Marcus's trail. 2 men got out, rifles slung, using flashlights to search for tire tracks. Marcus centered his scope on the space between them and fired, the round sparking off the truck's hood. Both men dove for cover, flashlights extinguished, and Marcus was already moving, relocating 20 yards to a new position before return fire could zero his location. Eli's voice carried across the darkness, amplified by the ravine's acoustics. "You can't run forever, Reed. We've got this whole area locked down." Marcus didn't respond, conserving energy and giving away nothing. 3 more vehicles had arrived at the creek, men deploying with tactical precision that suggested some had military or law enforcement background. They spread out, trying to flank his position, but the boulder field's narrow passages forced them into predictable routes. Marcus picked his shots carefully, not trying to kill, but to suppress, to make them cautious, to burn their time the way they were trying to burn his. And then a round struck the boulder inches from his head, stone chips cutting his cheek. Marcus rolled left, came up firing, saw one of the flankers stumble back with a hit to his vest. Body armor meant they'd come prepared for serious resistance. Marcus adjusted his aim higher, targeting heads and legs, places Kevlar didn't cover. The next shot dropped a man screaming, clutching his thigh where the bullet had shattered bone. The assault faltered. Eli's people had expected a chase, maybe a brief firefight, not a dug-in opponent who knew how to use terrain and whose shots landed with professional accuracy. Marcus heard shouted arguments, someone suggesting they pull back and call for heavier support. But Eli's response was venomous, driving them forward through sheer force of rage. "He's 1 man with a hunting rifle. We're 12. Move up and finish this." They came in a rush, trying to overwhelm through numbers. Marcus met them with methodical fire, working the bolt smoothly, placing rounds with the kind of cold precision that came from years of range qualification and street experience. He dropped 2 more men, wounded a third, and the assault broke apart into chaos. The survivors scattered back to cover, and Marcus used the respite to check his ammunition. 4 rounds left in the rifle, maybe 30 in his pockets. Enough for now, but not enough if this turned into a siege. His phone buzzed, text from an unknown number. Marcus risked a glance at the screen and saw Agent Miller's identification. Status, Marcus typed one-handed, rifle braced against the boulder. Pinned down 3 miles east of cabin, 12 hostiles, running low on ammo. Daughter secure at cabin with civilian guard. Cache location documented. 2 subjects restrained on site. Miller's response came immediately. Helicopter en route to your position, ETA 45 minutes. Can you hold? Marcus looked at his remaining ammunition, counted the vehicles below, calculated odds. 45 minutes was an eternity in a firefight, but it was also hope. He typed, "Will hold." The knowledge that extraction was coming changed the calculation. Marcus no longer needed to escape, just survive. He could give ground if necessary, fall back deeper into the boulder field, trade space for time. Eli's people had the numbers, but Marcus had patience and the defender's advantage. Every minute they spent trying to dig him out was a minute closer to federal intervention. Eli tried a new approach, his voice carrying false reasonableness. "Marcus, let's talk about this. You've got evidence, we've got manpower. There's a deal to be made here." Marcus almost laughed at the transparent attempt. Eli wanted him talking, wanted a voice to target. Instead, Marcus picked up a fist-sized rock and threw it hard to his left, letting it clatter down the slope. Instantly, 3 rifles opened up on the sound, muzzle flashes revealing positions. Marcus returned fire at those flashes, heard a cry of pain, and relocated again before they could adjust. Time became elastic, measured in heartbeats in the slow crawl of the phone's clock. Marcus fought with mechanical efficiency, shooting and moving, conserving ammunition, making every round count. Twice more Eli's people tried coordinated pushes, and twice Marcus broke them with well-placed fire. Bodies accumulated at the boulder field's base, some motionless, others crawling to cover. Marcus felt no satisfaction in the violence, only grim necessity. These men had helped kill Sarah, had come to murder him and Emma. They'd earned what they received. The sound of rotor blades came as distant thunder, growing rapidly louder. Marcus saw panic ripple through Eli's remaining people. Men who'd signed up for drug dealing and evidence destruction, but not for federal intervention. The helicopter swept over the ridgeline with spotlights blazing, illuminating the battlefield in harsh white light. A voice boomed through a PA system overwhelming in its authority. "FBI, drop your weapons and lie face down. This is your only warning." Most of Eli's people complied immediately, rifles falling from nerveless hands as they hit the ground. A few ran for vehicles, only to find armed agents emerging from the tree line, having fast roped from the helicopter's first pass. Marcus watched Eli himself try to fade into the forest, but FBI had brought bows, German shepherds whose barking cut through the night. Fitting, Marcus thought, that canines would bring down the man who'd betrayed one of their own. The helicopter settled in a clearing 50 yards from Marcus's position, rotor wash flattening brush and kicking up debris. Agent Miller jumped out before the skids fully touched earth, moving toward Marcus with a team of agents providing security. He was late 40s, compact and fit, with the kind of weathered competence that came from years in the field. His eyes found Marcus among the boulders, and something like relief flickered across his professional mask. His voice carried over the dying rotor noise. "Marcus Reed, you've had a hell of a day." Marcus lowered the rifle, every muscle in his body suddenly aware of fatigue and strain. "My daughter, the cabin. Team's already there. She's safe, along with Harold Chen and one very protective German shepherd. They're being extracted to Denver as we speak." Miller climbed up to Marcus's position, surveying the carnage below. "You held off 12 men for 40 minutes with a hunting rifle. That's impressive and insane in equal measure. Had good motivation." Marcus's hands were shaking now that adrenaline was fading, the rifle suddenly heavy. "Sarah's evidence. The cache. Did your people secure it?" "Already done. We've got the ravine site locked down. The 2 men you restrained are in custody, and the cache contents are being cataloged. Combined with the USB and SD card, we've got enough to dismantle Reyes's entire network." Miller gestured toward the helicopter. "Come on, let's get you to your daughter." The flight to Denver passed in a blur of exhaustion and reaction. Marcus sat wrapped in a thermal blanket, watching Colorado's mountains give way to the city's sprawling lights. Miller sat across from him, reviewing preliminary reports on a tablet, occasionally asking questions Marcus answered mechanically. The full scope of Sarah's case was emerging. 15 officers compromised, 40 separate drug shipments documented, enough RICO charges to put Reyes and his lieutenants away for multiple lifetimes. At FBI's Denver field office, Marcus was reunited with Emma in a secure conference room. His daughter ran to him with a ferocity that nearly knocked him over, her thin arms locked around his waist, face buried in his chest. Hal stood nearby with Shadow, the dog, limping but alert, her amber eyes tracking every agent in the room with professional suspicion. The puppies were in a carrier, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos of extraction. Emma's voice came muffled against his shirt. "You came back. I promised I would." Marcus held her tight, letting exhaustion and relief wash over him in equal measure. "It's over, Emma. The people who hurt Mom, they're all going to prison." Miller gave them privacy for several minutes before approaching with care. "Marcus, Emma, I need to brief you on what happens next. Eli Hawkins and 7 of his associates are in custody. Victor Reyes was arrested an hour ago at his Denver residence. We're executing warrants on 15 additional suspects. The evidence Sarah compiled is airtight, which means this goes to trial fast and clean." He paused, his expression softening. Sarah Reed saved lives. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. The fentanyl in that cache alone would have killed more people than most mass shootings. What she did mattered. Marcus felt Emma trembling against him and knew she was crying silently, the way she'd done for 8 months. But these tears were different. Release instead of imprisonment. Grief that could finally begin to heal now that justice was coming. He met Miller's eyes over his daughter's head. Sarah left instructions in her journal. She wanted Shadow to retire, to live out her life somewhere safe. Shadow's earned that and more. Canine handlers across the country will want to honor her service. Miller's gaze moved to the dog, who watched him with that unnerving intelligence. There'll be ceremonies, medals, the whole recognition package. But first, she deserves rest. You all do. The FBI provided temporary housing, a secure apartment where Marcus and Emma could decompress, while forensic accountants and prosecutors built their cases. Days blurred together, interviews and debriefings interspersed with moments of quiet, where father and daughter began learning how to exist without the weight of secrets and danger. Emma started speaking more freely, full sentences instead of whispered fragments, her young voice finding strength as safety became real instead of theoretical. Shadow's injuries healed under veterinary care that spared no expense, FBI covering costs as a payment for her years of service. The puppies grew at an astonishing rate, tumbling and playing in ways that made Emma laugh, genuine joy that Marcus hadn't heard since before Sarah's death. Hal visited often, bringing updates from Pine Ridge and news that Margaret Walsh had returned from her sister's place to find the town buzzing with federal agents and journalists. The $5 cabin had become famous overnight, the linchpin in Colorado's largest drug bust. 3 months after that night in the Boulder field, Marcus stood in federal court and watched Eli Hawkins sentenced to 45 years without parole. Victor Reyes got life plus 60, his organization dismantled so thoroughly that prosecutors used it as a template for future RICO cases. The corrupt sheriff and his deputies received their own sentences, the courtroom packed with families of victims who died from Reyes's fentanyl. Marcus testified with clinical precision, laying out the timeline from Sarah's investigation to the final confrontation, letting the evidence speak louder than emotion. When it ended, when the last defendant was remanded to custody and the judge's gavel fell with finality, Marcus and Emma walked out of the courthouse into autumn sunlight. Reporters shouted questions they didn't answer. Cameras flashed documenting this small piece of history. But Marcus's attention was on his daughter, on the way she held her head higher than she had in months, on the sketch pad tucked under her arm that she'd been filling with drawings of Shadow and the puppies and memories of Sarah that could finally be examined without the weight of unfinished business crushing them. Agent Miller caught up with them at the courthouse steps, slightly out of breath. "Marcus, Emma, wait." He extended an envelope, official FBI seal embossed on heavy paper. "This arrived this morning from the director himself." Inside was a letter of commendation for Sarah Reed, posthumously recognizing her service and sacrifice. But more than that, it was an offer. Financial compensation for her family, full benefits as if she'd been an FBI agent at time of death, an educational trust for Emma that would cover university and beyond. The government's way of acknowledging that Sarah had done their job when they couldn't had paid the price for their institutional failures. Marcus folded the letter carefully, his throat tight. She would have said it wasn't about money. No, it wasn't, but you and Emma deserve support, and this is how we can provide it. Miller's expression was serious, respectful. One more thing. The K-9 unit in Denver wants to name their new training facility after Sarah. They're calling it the Reed Center for K-9 Excellence. Figured you should know before the announcement. Emma's hand found Marcus's, squeezing tight. Her voice came steady and clear, the girl who'd been silent for 8 months now speaking for her mother. She would have liked that. She always said the dogs were heroes who deserved better. She was right. Miller shook Marcus's hand, then Emma's, treating her with the respect of an equal. Take care of each other, and take care of Shadow. She's a legend now, even if she doesn't know it. The cabin in Pine Ridge became something different over the following year. Marcus and Emma returned to it not as refugees, but as homeowners, legal title transferred from Sarah's estate without contest. Marcus used the FBI's compensation to restore the structure properly. New roof, repaired foundation, modern amenities that made it livable year-round. But he kept Sarah's hiding places, turned them into displays that honored her work. The space under the stove became a memorial. Photographs of Sarah with Shadow, her badge, the journal that documented her investigation. Hal helped with the renovation, his carpenter's skills turning rough cabin into home. Margaret visited often, bringing coffee and stories about the townspeople who'd adopted Marcus and Emma as their own. Pine Ridge had embraced them, proud to be associated with the story of Sarah's courage and Shadow's service. The town's small museum created an exhibit about the case, donations funding a scholarship for local students interested in law enforcement or veterinary medicine. But Marcus's real work began when Victor Alvarez approached him with a proposal. The craggy-faced veteran had heard about Marcus's story through the network of former military that stretched across Colorado, had driven up from Grand Junction specifically to meet the man who'd held off a dozen armed attackers while protecting his daughter. They talked for hours on the cabin's rebuilt porch, discovering shared understanding born from different wars but similar scars. Victor's idea was simple and powerful. Use the cabin as a training center for therapy dogs, specifically focused on pairing canines with veterans suffering PTSD. Shadow would be the program's inspiration, the dog who'd served, survived, and now deserved to help others heal the way she was healing. Marcus saw immediately how the pieces fit. Sarah's legacy transformed from investigation and evidence into ongoing salvation, saving lives through different means, but with the same purpose. They called it Sarah's Legacy K-9 Program, and it launched the following spring with Shadow as the matriarch and her 3 puppies, now full-grown, as the foundation of the breeding program. Emma designed the logo, her artistic skills nurtured by Margaret's patient teaching. Shadow's silhouette against a mountain sunrise, protection and hope in equal measure. Marcus handled operations, using his law enforcement background to navigate regulations and certifications, while Victor brought the veteran network and trauma expertise that made the program effective. The first veteran they helped was Daniel Rodriguez, 36 years old, both legs lost to an IED in Kandahar. Nightmare so severe, his wife had moved out because he'd nearly strangled her during a flashback. Victor brought him to the cabin on a cold April morning, introduced him to Scout, Shadow's oldest son, and Marcus watched something shift in Daniel's hollow eyes when the dog pressed against his wheelchair without hesitation or pity. 3 months later, Daniel was sleeping through the night, rebuilding his marriage, and volunteering to help train the next wave of service dogs. They helped 15 veterans that first year, then 30 the second, the program expanding as word spread through VA hospitals and military networks. Donors contributed funding, corporations provided supplies, and volunteers arrived from across Colorado to assist with training and care. The cabin that Marcus had bought for $5 in desperation became the center of an operation that employed a dozen people and served veterans from 6 states. Emma thrived in ways Marcus had feared impossible after Sarah's death. She worked with the dogs daily, her gentle presence calming even the most traumatized animals. Her artwork earned recognition beyond Pine Ridge, galleries in Denver displaying her pieces documenting the bond between veterans and canine partners. She spoke at schools and veteran centers, telling Sarah's story with eloquence that honored her mother's memory while inspiring others. The selective mutism that had trapped her for 8 months became a distant memory, replaced by a voice that carried authority and compassion. Shadow retired officially at age 8, having served far longer than most canines. She spent her days in the cabin's sunlight. The puppies she'd birthed beneath those floorboards, now parents themselves, third-generation service dogs carrying her genes and training. Veterans who visited always asked to meet her, the legendary dog whose evidence had brought down an empire. Shadow tolerated the attention with dignity, but her real joy came from Emma, from the girl she'd protected and who'd grown into someone Sarah would have been proud to call daughter. On a summer evening 2 years after the final court cases concluded, Marcus sat on the cabin's porch with Hal and Margaret, watching Emma work with a young veteran named Lisa Chen, teaching her commands for Hope, one of Shadow's grandchildren. The mountain air carried pine scent and the sounds of dogs playing in the yard, peace earned through trial and loss, but no less valuable for the price paid. Hal's weathered voice broke the comfortable silence. Sarah knew this would happen. She told me once before everything went wrong that if she died, the cabin would become something good. She believed you and Emma would make it so. Marcus thought about his wife, about her foresight and sacrifice, about the path she'd laid out knowing she wouldn't survive to walk it. She gave us the tools. We just had to be brave enough to use them. That's what family does, Margaret added, her voice soft with memory. They fight for each other, even when fighting seems impossible, especially then. Emma finished her session with Lisa and walked toward the porch, Shadow limping beside her, the old dog's muzzle gray now, but her amber eyes still sharp. Emma sat between Marcus and Hal, leaning into her father's shoulder the way she used to as a small child. Lisa's doing really well. Hope responds to her like they've known each other forever. That's your mother's training showing through, Marcus replied, wrapping an arm around his daughter. 3 generations of dogs, all carrying what she taught. I miss her. Emma's voice carried the ache that never fully disappeared, the permanent absence that time softened but couldn't erase. But I feel like she's still here in the program, in Shadow, in what we're doing. She is. Marcus pulled Emma closer, looked out over the clearing where the cabin stood solid and permanent, where veterans found healing and dogs found purpose. Every person we help, that's Sarah's work continuing. Every life saved by therapy dogs, that's her legacy growing. She didn't just stop Reyes's drugs. She started something that'll outlive all of us. Shadow shifted at Emma's feet, resting her scarred head on the girl's leg. The connection between them was wordless, built through shared trauma and survival, through the night they'd hidden beneath these floorboards and the years since spent building something beautiful from terrible foundations. Marcus saw in that connection everything Sarah had hoped for: protection given and received, love that transcended species and circumstance, purpose born from pain. The stars emerged as twilight deepened, Colorado's sky vast and clear above the mountains. Inside the cabin, the space where Sarah had hidden her evidence now held photographs of veterans reunited with families, dogs placed in homes across America, letters from people whose lives had been transformed by the program. The $5 purchase that had seemed like desperation's last gamble had become the foundation of healing for hundreds. Marcus thought about the journey from that first terrible night, from finding Shadow bleeding beneath the floorboards to this moment of hard-won peace. He thought about the choices Sarah had made, knowing they'd cost her life, but trusting him to finish what she'd started. And he understood finally that she hadn't died for evidence or justice, though those mattered. She died betting on his strength, on Emma's resilience, on the possibility that love could survive anything if people were brave enough to fight for it. Emma's whisper cut through his thoughts, barely audible but weighted with understanding beyond her years. The cabin wasn't what saved us. We saved each other. Yeah, Marcus agreed, his voice rough with emotion and gratitude. Yeah, we did. In the distance, a dog barked. Another answered, and the sound carried across the valley like a promise that broken things could be rebuilt, that sacrifice could transform into salvation, that a family destroyed could rise from its ashes stronger and more purposeful than before. The cabin that cost $5 had purchased something beyond price, a second chance, a new beginning, and proof that even in the darkest moments, hope survives if someone is brave enough to protect it. Shadow's tail thumped once against the porch boards, her amber eyes closing in contentment, and Marcus knew without question that Sarah was smiling somewhere, watching the legacy she'd built with blood and courage flourish into something beautiful. The war she'd fought was over. The peace she'd died to create was real. And the family she'd protected with her final breath was whole, healed, and honoring her memory with every life they touched.